I had an idea for a show, but first I needed a table, backdrop, and a host with a microphone. That's me. I'm Thomas J. Beleza, and this is Let Me Be Round With You, a show where discussions are explored through civil conversation. So I found 4 people I like and decided to see where today's topic goes in hopes we can inspire positive dialogue.
Well, welcome to Let Me Be Round With You. And today on the show, we're going to ultimately discuss a few sore, maybe controversial discussions about racism in a changing world. Our goal is to focus on racism in a changing world. I'm Thomas J. Beleza, and I'll be your moderator for this exchange. I'm joined today by 4 lovely guests, Natalie Seagriff, Kenny Murdoch, Victoria McGinnis, and of course, the ever beautiful Paul LaPlaca. And let's start off with Natalie. Natalie, tell us a little bit about who you are.
I'm Natalie Seagriff, and I'm an architect in the Albany, New York area, and I have 2 beautiful children, a wonderful husband, and lots of furry creatures that are basically children as well. And that's it.
Kenny Murdoch, who are you? What do you do? And why should we buy into your product?
I'm Kenny Murdoch. You should buy into my product because I'm unique, special, and different than everybody else. My product would be writing. I do it mostly in the New York area, and I'm excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, man. Victoria McGinnis, who are you?
Hi, so I am Victoria McGinnis. No, just kidding. I'm Victoria McGinnis. I am from New York, and I am an actress and a dancer.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Mr. Paul LaPlaca.
Hi,
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a multi-instrumentalist and a producer and a sound engineer with my own radio show on Tuesday nights on purerockradio.net called 6 Degrees with Paul LaPlaca.
Oh, yeah, and that definitely takes you around the 6 degrees with Paul LaPlaca. Apparently, he knows everyone who knows somebody who once knew somebody that was related to his uncle.
I'm the Kevin Bacon of metal.
Yeah, he's the Kevin Bacon of metal. However, he tastes like a beautiful tasting apple. I don't know what that means, but we're going to move on. All right. Today's position is a topic that some might say, what are 4 white-looking people talking about? Well, we're not talking about racism in general. We're not talking about how bad racism is, and we're not talking that there is racism. We're not even discussing the fact that variations of our society over thousands of years has incurred variations and variables of racism. No, today I want to suggest what our position of the episode is, which is we're asking questions to understand racism in a changing world. To define the position of this topic, I would like to first say today is not about is there racism in the world. We are, as a team, as a group at this table, acknowledging there is indeed racism. That groups of people, cultures, and all over the world, there is racism. It is a horrid, terrible, and outright cruel, absolutely cruel to the complete destruction of our humanity in some situations, including a person and a people's identity, simply by the color of their skin, the race of their birthplace, and the cultural creed in which they were raised. Today, we want to talk about the idea of growth. Can we heal from racism and see a world where it does not exist? What can we do as a species to come together as a one people? Is it possible? I want to bring out this quote from Morgan Freeman. I'm sure everyone has heard it, especially once I start saying it. Morgan Freeman was once asked about racism in general, and is it something we can get away with and heal from? And he said, and I quote, "How do we stop racism? Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man, and I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man." That is the quote that he said during an interview. Now, ultimately, I don't believe we should stop talking about racism. Obviously, to heal from something, we need to understand it. This is the reason we have history, to learn from our mistakes and to grow as a community, which brings us to today's show. Taking the history of what has come, is there a potential for growth? And will there ever be a day where someone stops calling this person a white person and this person a black man? Is it possible? So I'm going to give the table to Paul LaPlaca first. What do you feel about the Morgan Freeman quote Do you think he makes sense? Do you think it is plausible?
No, I don't. And I'm going to expand on the concept of what we're talking about with racism here to include all isms and how I feel like they develop. I feel like as children, when we start entering into our prepubescent stages and into adolescence, we start defining ourselves by comparing ourselves to others, and we define ourselves by what we are not. And this goes into like music snobbery. When I was a child, 12, 13, 14 years old, I would be very violently against people that were into music that wasn't progressive or hard rock or metal. And I would define myself by saying, I am not that. And I would see that happen with religion and with racism and political points of view that we see now. It's a point of being very immature and childish in how we come up with our own identities, that we focus on the things we are not, and then we demonize and point out the negative parts of the stereotypes of those other isms and portions of the society or music or race, culture, religion. Over there, the thing that we are not, and it's bad. That thing that they are, that I am not, is bad. So until we can find some way of evolving past that way of defining ourselves by the opposite of what we are, and then making that into a point of tribalism where that tribe is different from my tribe and mine is better because I am not that. That's where I think the root of it is. For all the forms of intolerance that we have with sexism and religious intolerance and on and on and on, it's something that happens in our development, in our transition from childhood into our teenage years. My opinion is that's where the root of it is. It's learning how to define yourself by what you are, not by what you aren't. And stop taking so much comfort in your little tribe, whether it's a religion or whatever ism you subscribe to. Stop embracing that, and that comfort being in a tribe and a group of people that might find a certain group, style of music or a style of art, like that is my tribe. That kind of comfort, I think we have to get away from. We have to get away from defining ourselves in that way.
Yeah, and to your point, if it's not progressive rock, it's not music. Anyway, I agree with Paul on some of his points, and I'd like to devil's advocate this for a second. Paul was saying that the way we grow up, our culture influence basically helps say what we're not, right? If we're around only white people, we become like, oh, we're white people. We identify ourselves. But that brings us to the argument, the psychological argument that there have been case studies where racism is limited based on mixing the cultures. In fact, I'm sure you've seen videos and stories where like there's like a little white kid and a little black kid, and they're just hugging, they're having fun, and they're just hanging out. There's little to any influence of hate in that situation. They're just two kids playing around and having fun. Does that mean that ultimately, if we could adjust the cultural aspect of our raising children, would that help influence, the change towards racism? Will help influence the growth as we are one people and not isolate us to identifying ourselves to what we are not, and more focused on who we are as people, as a group. Let's ask Natalie on that. What are your thoughts?
Is this because I have children that you're asking me?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think.
Is that true? Childrenism?
I think that's.
Is that childrenism?
Childrenism? Yeah, that's childrenism.
Sorry.
I'm offended. No, but on a serious note, I think it's difficult because, I think on a very kind of biological level, we have this need to keep our tribe whole, right? That's like a survivalist thing that's just been ingrained with, in us since we started walking upright, I think. And you see it across other species even, right? So I think that's a really tough thing to get rid of that instinct to stay within your group or keep that group together and not compare. But I think what, as a society, what needs to happen is individually, we need to all kind of go through this ego death, right? For anything to take place on a societal level, because until we stop doing that comparison or doing that self-protection or protection of our group, then nothing's really going to change. But that comes down to changing who you are and how you see things, and getting everyone to do that at the same time is going to be extremely difficult. But I think it's happening in stages, and what we're seeing is that transition right now, and it's painful. It's definitely not easy. I think not acknowledging it is the wrong thing to do. And I think there was a time where people were kind of pushing that, like, don't acknowledge differences. Well, no, we all are different, but we all have commonness as well. So commonality, I should say. I mean, it's a obviously a multifaceted issue, and it's not an easy fix ever. But it comes down to everyone's ego needing to go through that realization that, we don't need to protect ourselves from people who are not like us, if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And to your tribalism, that is definitely a part of us. I mean, if you break it down, there's, we're New Yorkers, but we're also from Suffolk, and then we're Longwood School District. And then it's, New York hates Jersey, and then Suffolk hates Nassau, and then, Longwood hates Sachem. And then in the school system, it's like, there are the nerds, there's the athletes, there's the drama. So we segregate ourselves just naturally because we want to feel like we fit in, the tribalism mentality. To counter that with the devil's advocate notion is ultimately suggesting that where you said it happens in other species. For example, lions usually stay with lions, tigers stay with tigers, and bears. Oh my! There is a community where it is a bear, a tiger, and I believe a lion, and they grew up as cubs, and they became a united family. And it's a park you can go to, and you pay to see them, whatever. And they're all really loving animals too. They're not kept in massive cages. They're free roaming, and they're always cuddling together and keeping close. It's not like they're in a zoo. They're in they were rescued, and that goes to my argument with what I was saying to Paul is ultimately, if we can educate the young to see differently, if a bear, a tiger, and a lion can get together, why can't an extreme evolution of species in the human race not have the ability to say, well, I don't care that you got a tan. I don't care that you don't have a tan. What would change that is my next point, which is, do you think people are ill-informed or uninformed altogether on this subject? And as they are raised around the darkness of racism, they basically take on that culture of dissidence to be against such hatred or just, well, you're not one of our people, right? Like, for example, people won't take the time to look up important information, but they'll spend 15 minutes taking a quiz online to figure out what kind of potato they are. And that's the reality is like, well, why don't we take the time to understand the growth and change? So I want to give this one to Kenny Murdoch. Do you feel we are ill-informed, or do you think we're just uninformed?
I think you made a great point to, the tiger and the bear and the elephant or whomever it was growing up together and not, realizing that they're different. And a big key point to what you said is that I don't care how many tigers I see balance on a ball or dogs I see open the refrigerator and bring their owner a beer. They do have a limited intelligence, and it almost seems crazy to me that us as human beings, with the ability to be smarter almost inherently than an animal, that sometimes we seem dumber than animals. Do I think? I think it is what's ingrained. You know, it is a lot of what you see and what you hear. Is it misinformation? No, I don't think a lot of it is misinformation. I think a lot of it is statistic based. And without getting, we're trying to stay away from. Again, we established that we know racism exists, and we're not really trying to talk about that. We're just trying to talk about how to get further from it. But you really have to take a moment to step back and look at what racism has institutionalized to this point. Even if you look at, you know, the typical stereotypes of going through a certain neighborhood, so you lock your doors because you hear of the reputation that neighborhood has. The people in that neighborhood might have that reputation because they've been so held back for so long that they have to do these kind of out of the box things and these immoral things to just to survive, just to get ahead, feel like they can get ahead because they can't necessarily go into any job and get it. So do I think the information is there. I think it's all at our fingertips. I do think that we, like you had said, we'll take 15 minutes to take the quiz to find out which character at Bayside High we most relate to, but we won't take the 15 minutes to look at crime rates. We won't take the 15 minutes to look at, you know, a place where maybe it's just as bad as somewhere we've seen other places. You know, for every Compton, I've been to a backwoods place in Virginia where I feel like if, you know, the fact that I don't have overalls on with no shirt is going to get me shot. Like, I've been somewhere where everywhere has made me feel uncomfortable. So I don't think it's a misinformation. I think it's misinformation in what we're taught from a young age. And it's kind of just a very sad thing to say because it almost seems like we can't go forward without going backwards first, you know, to not put it on such to put it on like a grander scale. Like, it almost seems like we have to breed out or eliminate whole thought processes, because you can get together Bob Dylan and all these people and make a We Are the World for racism, but you know, there's a guy in a shack in Alabama who doesn't get TV reception, you know. So like, how do we change that guy's mind, that what he's been taught since, you know, his people first built a log cabin in 1898? How do we change his mind that, you know, especially limited to who we are? You know, I can't get people to change their mind on sriracha. I'm going to get people to change their mind on racism. You know, that's crazy to me, even a thought to try to tackle that process. I think there's plenty of information out there that will make you sit back and go, wow, it's not a race thing. It's a person thing. It's how you were raised, and it's what, you know, your morals and values are, whatever color of the rainbow you are, that you're going to follow. And that's what you need to change. I think anybody could take the time and educate themselves enough to know that we are, whatever color we are on the outside, we're all, you know, red, blue, and a little pink on the inside. So it's really just, maybe it is misinformation. Maybe it really is just what we're presented, and we don't go that extra step to, you know, is this true or not? Is this really the case? So, you know, I think you're right. I think it's misinformation. I think it's just word of mouth from when you're young. It's just, you know, this is the way it is. This is the places you don't go, and these are the people you don't interact with. And until that one individual person experiences something that makes them realize that's just not true here, I don't know if you really could change anyone's mind, at least in our lifetime.
Yeah, and that's true. You know, maybe not in our lifetime, but how do we start educating the next generation? How do we start education, the movement of change? You know, I once heard a white guy tell me that all black people like fried chicken. And I was like, I was in a 5.5-year relationship with a black woman who was absolutely African, and she hated fried chicken, which therefore completely negates your comment that all black people like fried chicken. And I think even growing up, you know, in my youth, that was the joke, fried chicken and watermelon, which is insane. You know, that's misinformation. That's teaching me as a child that, you know, all black people, they like watermelon and fried chicken, which I'm sure is the same for other cultures where, you know, that's where we get terrible stereotypes. And you know, they say, well, stereotype is true because it came from somewhere. And it's like, no, not. I also have Asian friends that don't know how to fix computers. Like you know what I'm saying? Like, for us to place such generalized statements on a whole culture, I think it's more important to say somebody that puts time into learning how to fix a computer can fix a computer, and somebody who likes fried chicken likes fried chicken. It doesn't matter. Their culture does not dictate their enjoyment, and again, that's where the misinformation comes from. What I'm presenting is I'm saying that as children, we are being taught the ignorance of whatever it is they were taught without anyone going beyond the Bayside High test, and just saying to themselves, well, this is what I know, so I'm your parent. It's like, well, why? And they say, well, because I said so. Well, now you're not educating me. You're stopping the topic, right? I want to move on to, the last subject of the show is cultural assimilation. This is definitely something that is argued amongst a lot of people. There's a lot of dispute about it, or discussion, I should say. But usually it's a very aggressive discussion. Like, you cannot do A because of B. And I'm going to bring up a few topics of that. But before we get into it, let me really go into what cultural assimilation is as a position, so we can at least understand the debate. Cultural assimilation is the process in which a minority group or culture comes to resemble a society's majority group or assume the values, behaviors, and beliefs of another group. A conceptualization describes cultural assimilation as similar to acculturation, while another merely considers the former as one of the latter's phrases. Throughout history, there have been different forms of cultural assimilation. Examples of types of assimilation include voluntary and involuntary assimilation. Assimilation could also involve the so-called addictive acculturation, wherein instead of replacing the ancestral culture or individual expands their existing cultural repertoire. I read an article recently that really talks about this. And in the article, which was written by a non-white person, right? It was in The Tab. And the title was, "Why It's Not Okay for White People to Have Dreadlocks or Even Cornrows," right? So is this, I'm going to throw this to Victoria, Victoria, on this subject, why is it inappropriate for white people, or as the article presented, only people that have some sort of black nation or culture in them should have the right to that style of hair, dreadlocks and cornrows, and that it is inappropriate for any race or culture to assimilate that style? What are your thoughts on that subject?
So this is a very hairy topic.
Is that a pun?
Yes. So my background, I am mixed. I have a bunch of different backgrounds in my personal DNA. So this is one of the things that actually kind of like is.
All right. So while she unfreezes, to get into the concept of the dreadlock or the cornrow mentality, where does it stop? Does it stop with food? Assimilation, cultural assimilation has basically made America what America is. And we're gonna bring this to Paul. The idea is that you're back, but I'll come back to you, Victoria.
Oh, I'm so into this.
I know, but you got to plug your computer into your Ethernet wire. All right. But moving on to Paul, the idea is we've had cultural assimilation throughout the existence of life, from the Japanese now becoming mostly a Chinese belief system, meaning Buddhism was Chinese based and eventually became the majority faith style of the Japanese culture. Other things is ultimately like America became a melting pot of culture change. Believe it or not, the only reason the Irish like their cabbage and beef boiled is because when they moved here from Ireland, the Italians refused to sell them anything. So the only people they could buy from were the Jewish community, and they were limited to the cabbage and beef, the corned beef. And that became just an American tradition for the Irish American culture. It's not like in Ireland, they're like, let's boil everything. It's definitely not what they do there, right? So when is it inappropriate? So is that something we're not allowed to enjoy? Does that mean unless your culture eats tacos, you are not allowed tacos? Does that mean if your culture does not enjoy pizza, you can't eat pizza? Which, by the way, I would literally die if I could not eat pizza. But the same thing with the Greek culture with feta cheese. Does that mean if you're not Greek, you can't eat the feta cheese? You know, being born, I'm going to give this to you, Paul, in a second. I just want to kind of identify this topic. You know, being born in a body, in a location, into a family or a culture you had no choice in, to only discover your bonding piece with something beyond you should be a choice, shouldn't it? Should we not be dictated by where we are born, but ultimately our likes and dislikes? If you like tacos, why can't you eat tacos? If you like corn rolls or dreadlocks, what is wrong with that? Paul, what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, for me personally, my only experience with that kind of cultural appropriation is coming from, you know, the heavy metal background, and seeing something like a Hot Topic take those kind of fashion statements from my community. Or, you know, it's very popular right now with the Kardashians to be wearing some heavy metal t-shirts and that kind of stuff. So on a very limited level, I can appreciate where this person is coming from, saying, you can't take a part of my culture and the things that I identify with and identify me as part of this group, and then just kind of dilute it and use it in a way that's very surface level and has no depth and understanding of what that's about. So I don't know anything about dreadlocks, but my understanding of it is, you know, you're coming from a Jamaican culture, I guess, and it's part of the Rastafarian culture, which is it's deeply spiritual. So I think, like, I don't know enough about it, but my guess is that outward display means something very special to the people that are doing it. And then for somebody outside of the culture to appropriate and take it in and use it on a surface level is very deeply offensive. And it doesn't pay respect to it in a way that, that, you know, the people that feel like they're being borrowed from feel respected. So that's my only connection to that is that feeling of like, okay, well, I understand it on a very surface level from my experience. The only problem is there's no stopping it. There's no way of telling people they're not allowed, but there are ways of telling them, look, what you're doing here is bullshit. You know, in particular, like with, you know, with my culture and the heavy metal t-shirts, it's like, you can't wear a shirt of a band you've never heard of. You're, you know, it's like, it's ridiculous. So I think you have to take the piss out of people and let them know it's like, what you're doing here is ridiculous, and knock it off.
All right. I mean, to your point, I'm going to bring up a counter to it. You know, you said that the Rastafarian, which, by the way, as a cultural religion, is not as old as you think it is. In fact, I believe it became more mainstream once, you know, the popularity of reggae became something more exclusive. But the Gauls in the Mediterranean were known for having dreadlocks, and they weren't necessarily of African descent. Additionally, the Scandinavians would wear, or even Druidic cultures would have symbolized dreads, not full-on dreads, but representation of the dread as a spiritual aspect. You know, and they were definitely not dark skinned. So, you know, the idea is like to move forward from, you know, cultural assimilation or even just racism in general is, you know, we are people. And, you know, we must educate ourselves in keeping culture alive. I do agree with that. You know, there are certain cultural things that, you know, the way people celebrate their culture is beautiful, and it should. That's why, like, when people say there's no white pride, and it's like, well, there is no white race. There's the Italian pride. There's Black pride, which is usually representative of a gathering of different Black cultures. You know, there's Mexican pride. There's Brazilian pride. There's Irish pride. You know, but there's no such thing as white people. You know, like, and some people, they get attached to that concept. But, you know, with that said, again, Mediterraneans, like I'm Mediterranean, the Gauls and things like that. Does that mean I can wear dreads, especially if I represent that cultural growth and I decide that, I like that look? Is it against me? And let's go back to Victoria since she's back on. Add to this subject matter, moving on from what I originally asked you, taking what we've talked about and adding to it a little bit.
Okay. Well, see, the reason why I don't find meshing cultures as offensive is because people came here in particular to America for freedom. That was the whole point, right? It was freedom of religion. So I think it's almost damaging to not assimilate cultures, because how are you going to respect other people's systems if you don't do that, right? So if this is really hard for me, because I also worked, and not even just worked, I fell in love with a different culture's dance style. And I have danced many different dances in my life. I have danced salsa, merengue. I was a professional belly dancer for many years, which is, it's Middle Eastern dance. So I know many different types of Middle Eastern dances. I learned how to understand the language, and I think it is damaging to not assimilate certain things into your life. Growing up for myself, I live in Long Island. This place was, heavily influenced by Native American culture. And I learned about it very young. I grew up around, a lot of Jewish people. So I learned a lot about the Jewish culture. And I think that has made me a very well-rounded person. So that's where I would stand on this topic. I think that it's very important to get to know other cultures and to learn about other cultures and respect other cultures, because I think that that's really the way that we're going to be able to heal, any kind of racism in this world. I think that by understanding, learning, educating, and by maybe even, assimilating it into our own lives, I think that that is actually the best way you could spiritually grow as a person.
Yeah. And, that's the point, is like, it's not saying what you're saying is right or wrong. It's saying we're trying to come up with ideas. What is the solution for growth as a society? And to move into that a little deeper, you brought up the Middle Eastern culture. Most interesting enough about the Middle Eastern culture is arranged marriages. The tradition of arranged marriages is most commonly found in Eastern-based cultures, including India, Japan, and Japanese cultures. However, it was at one time equally popular in the Western culture, especially with the generational wealth. But somehow, a majority of individuals within these cultures are trying, and in some cases succeeding, to break free of tradition and believe they should choose their spouse. Is this a cause for cultural appropriation? Is this, does it make it okay? Should they be like, well, no, your stuff is arranged marriages. Don't take on our cultures as a society. So we're going to go to Natalie on this. What are your thoughts, not just on arranged marriage, but the idea that, in some cultures, they don't really enjoy what their cultural traditions are, and they're trying to step away from them and break free in some cases, and almost having their lives on the line to break tradition. What are your thoughts on that as an aspect?
I mean, I think it's just a natural result of globalization and the fact that we are more aware of things that are outside our general vicinity, geographically. And as people see what happens around the world, that's naturally going to get brought into their culture in some way, shape, or form. It's completely unavoidable. It's just like when, the Portuguese first started going down to South America, and, they brought some of the stuff from their culture there. And then they brought some stuff back from the natives that were on that land back to, back to Europe and back and forth. And so as far as, I guess it depends on what you consider damaging. Is it really just evolution, and some people just don't want to accept that evolution, or is it is it more nuanced than that? I'm not entirely sure of, but the concept of arranged marriages is very foreign to me. I've tried to understand that. I could not imagine someone picking out who my partner for life would be, but that's, the importance of that is completely unknown to me because I've never really been exposed to anyone who's ever been in that situation. So I couldn't really speak to that. But as far as other things that are happening around the world, like in Saudi Arabia, women finally getting to drive, and if we'd all been very, if the internet hadn't happened, and if all these other things, information coming in about other women being able to drive hadn't come in, how long would it have taken for them to be able to get there? I don't know. So, I mean,
no, that's you're making great points, and like you said, you've never been in a situation where you had an arranged marriage or been around that culture,
no.
But what it feels like to have the freedom to choose who you want to marry, and sure. Some of these people stuck in that cultural mentality want to break free, and they do in some cases. Sometimes it costs them their lives, and it's like, there's a beauty in being able to choose, but it's it's again, like, where do we draw the line? What, hair, food, marriage, So I want to end the show with a question, and I'll go around the table to kind of like answer this, starting with Kenny. What can we do as a people to bring people together as one? Even though that this is obviously a century-long conversation in itself as a question, what do you feel, or even what do you propose could potentially help bring people together as a one person, as a one people?
This is trying to talk about a defining Gandhi moment. I really, it just seems like just got to be more vulnerable as a people, I guess, more open to the idea of things coming from the outside. It is kind of crazy
Right.
that.
Well, we'll go to Victoria.
Somebody could say.
You froze a little bit. You froze a little bit.
Oh, I'm back. I'm back now. It is a little wild for somebody to participate in Taco Tuesday. Have a couple tacos and a margarita every Tuesday, and then get up and go to work on Wednesday and hate their Mexican coworker. That's like a little wild to me, so I guess just being more open and more accepting of everything, and not necessarily even associating dreadlocks with Black culture or tacos, with acknowledging that they are of that culture, but then progressively moving forward and making it available to other cultures, because as much as people want to be unified, there are a group of people saying, white people shouldn't have dreadlocks. And a lot of the times they don't have the reasoning behind that. Obviously there's a story behind dreadlocks, and there has to be reasoning as to why they feel white people shouldn't have dreadlocks, or anybody who, isn't Black or whatever. But that the 17-year-old kid who just never showers and, puts his hair in dreadlocks, I don't think he is really understanding the culture or where it comes from. He's just like, oh, dreadlocks look cool. I think I would look cool with them, so I'm going to do it, which is a double-edged sword in the sense of, wow, what a great mentality to have. Versus, but do you know why dreadlocks are a thing, or why it may be taboo for you to do that? Same thing with, like, Black people love pig's feet and stuff like that, and chitlins, and everybody's like, oh, that's gross, I would never eat that. But when 200 years ago, when that's what you were getting thrown at you to eat, it's what you eat. It's for dinner. You got some sort of sustenance to get by and survive. So I just think if maybe not so much lose the pride of where you're from and your cultural history, but maybe just dial it back in the now, kind of like living in the now. Let's appreciate the past, where we came from, but we're in the now. Let's kind of, accentuate the idea of the melting pot, and start making things available for people, and start dialing back a little bit on, what's culturally appropriate and what's not, and just letting people experience it for themselves, and maybe then it's in, you know, it's inherent in me. You tell me I can't do something, I'm going to want to do it more, you know? So why not take these stigmas and these taboos, appreciate Black culture, Mexican culture, Asian culture for what it is, but really kind of just make it open and available for everybody to, you know, be a part of. Maybe then the cookouts will be a little more assimilated by that nature.
Yeah, and you know, to add to your point is, again, we have no control where we're born. We have no control the people we're born in. In fact, you know, you could be a Black person, you know, or a Mexican born, let's say, in Canada, and you grow up with the Canada culture mentality, and then, you know, you don't know anything outside of that. Does that, you know, make you a bad person for not embracing the culture that you're linked to? You know, and does that mean they're wrong for embracing the culture of the Canadian French mentality, especially if Quebec or Montreal? You know, we're going to go to Victoria to add to this. You know, again, what can we do to bring people together? And, you know, obviously to the point of what Kenny said and what I said, you know, add to that thought. You know, you got to unmute yourself too.
So this is definitely and has been one of the best topics I think we've actually talked about. So just looking at humanity as a whole, everything that every culture does, hair, tattoos, makeup, jewelry, you know, everything is everything. You know, I'm sorry if that sounds like really hocus pocus or like spiritual, but everything is so interconnected that, you know, from culture to culture to culture, everything's been passed down. So I think it's really important to understand that, yes, we need to know where everything's coming from, but the best way to get, you know, to grow as a species, as an entire, you know, human beings, right, is to just be with everything. It's just to understand everything, you know, take it in, understand the cultures, understand who your neighbor is, you know, understand who your friends are. And I think that that's really what will help, you know, guide people in a better direction.
Yeah, you know, you bring up a good point about the tattoos as well. You know, it's something as simple as a tattoo. Somebody gets a tattoo of Mickey Mouse and they're like, I like Mickey Mouse. But in reality, are they discrediting a culture of Native Americans or even Hawaiians that it was a part of their war structure where it defined them as a warrior or you know, but now you got your Mickey Mouse, or you got, you know, this means peace in Chinese, but meanwhile it means like dumb, you know, dumb person, you know, because they don't actually speak Chinese or read it, right? And
even jewelry for like class, you know what I mean? Like poor people couldn't afford the nice jewelry, so people who were of higher classes wore beautiful diamonds. You can get diamonds now for nothing. So, you know, like everything is so assimilated, and it should be. You know, like this is life.
Yeah, well, you know, the argument is like it shouldn't be, but you know, our idea is like, well, let's try to grow, because you know, there again, you don't have control over where you're born, who you are. You're, you know, the people that educate you on your growth as an adult to an adult, and it's some things about culture connect with people. There's certain things that we see that, like, you know, I like runes, but I'm not from Germania or like, you know, that area. I was never even near Sicily, even though I'm Sicilian, you know. So, but I like that study in that culture, and it really brings something to me, you know. But it
resonates with you.
Yeah, I like this style of thought. I like these philosophies. Let's go to Natalie to basically answer the same question. You know, what could we do to bring people together, utilizing everything we've talked to up until this point as well?
I think snowballing on what everyone said, and I completely agree with their point. So I'm just gonna go in a little different direction. I think this is where the responsibility of the powers that be, you know, people in position of influence, or, you know, people in the media, accurately depicting different cultures becomes so important, so that people can become educated accurately on that culture. Like, I don't know, one thing that came to mind when we were, as you guys were talking, it was like what always drove me nuts was, now I love the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, right? I love it. But in the character, there's a guy, in the movie, there's a character and he's from Brazil, and I hear him speaking, and he's got, he clearly spoke Spanish. Brazilians do not. And they're just throwing out every single stereotype of the Brazilian culture at that point in time. So like what could have been done better there, I think was, hey, how about the people who are doing that movie do a little bit more research on that culture, things like that. So I think, that is extremely important.
Natalie, can I interject?
Sure.
Was that as offensive as Mickey Rooney doing the Asian character, though?
No, it wasn't. It annoyed me. I was not offended. It was annoying because it's I see it all the time, but it's not, again, was not offensive, but it's certainly annoying. And I think, and definitely that Mickey Rooney playing that character I'm sure was far more offensive and annoying. But given my perspective and my background, it was something that took my attention, right? Because of my environment that I grew up in. And I think that's true for anyone. So like if you grew up in an Asian background, you probably notice that Mickey Rooney character more so than the guy from Brazil, right? Who was supposedly from Brazil. So, but that's an excellent point. Now, given everything that we've encountered in the past, not to get too political, but just, we've seen the damage that can happen just by certain people talking certain ways in the media and things like that. And I think, and there's always been the counterpoints, but as long as there's always confirmation bias, it's going to be very difficult to totally eradicate it, right? Because people are going to read what they want and they believe what they want. But I think it comes down to education and accurately depicting cultures to the best of our ability. It's getting better. I don't think but it's still not, we still have a long way to go. I guess that's the point I have to say.
Yeah. And what you're saying is really true. The emotional aspect of it, again, I'm Sicilian. So when you see a Sicilian portrayed on television or movies and they're over like, yeah, they have the jewelry and they're like, I think the reflection of culture is important too. Giving pride and honesty and truth and respect to a culture in its representation is important in portraying that culture. I think what we're talking about in this section of the conversation is more or less, if I choose to wear dreads, I don't necessarily have to represent that culture. I'm wearing dreads. But if I'm portraying a character or the culture in a representation, let's say I'm doing a fashion shoot. There was a big argument about this fashion shoot where they were all Scandinavian women or white women. And they had the dreads and they were wearing a variation of African garb that was created by this designer who also was white, I believe Swedish, but I could be wrong on that, but he was white. And the argument was that they were portraying the culture, improperly, which in that situation, I completely understand it, because if you are using the culture as a starting point, as a, we're having an earthquake, using that, as a starting point for representation, now you should keep some sort of dignity to it. But if, let's say, I want to be a Buddhist, I don't have to become Japanese or represent the Japanese culture, being that it actually started in China and slowly became known as a Japanese religion. I should just be able to be a Buddhist, in that sense. But with that said, let's go to Paul to finish up the show. With everything that's been said, obviously, we're asking ultimately what your thoughts are on what could we do to bring people together as one.
I'm going to be a very negative voice in this regard. I don't think there's anything that we can do as an action to cause change in this situation. I think the only thing would ever unify us across all the isms is a common enemy. And it's been said before that if we were somehow invaded by an outer space culture, that somehow we would find our common humanity under a mutual threat. And I know it's an awful way and a cynical way to look at the world, but the older I get, the more hopeless I feel when it comes to terms of race and other issues where we are just so caught up, again, in our own little tribes, and we delight in expanding on the stereotypes of every other, literally, the other, no matter what it is. We find a way to unearth whatever negative we can and find that little stereotype that has a grain of truth within that culture or religion or whatever, and then expand on it. And every time someone acts out that stereotype, we get to say, see, I told you so. That's the way they are. And ignore all the times that a group or a culture goes against a negative stereotype, because then it's like those people become, oh, they're just people, because they're acting in a way that falls in line with what my little tribe and group thinks. So I really don't think there's any way that we can force a change until we're able to get out of that mindset. And I don't see it possible. We love having a group. We love having surrounding ourselves with like-minded people in our echo chambers, and we need to have an other to bounce. I am not that, and define ourselves by. And I hate feeling that way.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what your environment has brought you to, and that's your perspective. To loosely quote Gandhi, we have to become the change we want to see. I'm not a parent, but I'm sure Paul and Natalie can contest to this idea that telling a child what they should be doing is not as powerful as doing it and allowing them to see the behaviors. It's called mirroring, and it's the same thing with this approach. Is we're not necessarily trying to change people. How do we change ourselves to educate them to understand that it's about a one people and not necessarily, still respecting the culture of our history. I mean, we obviously, in the States, we don't say, who's George Washington? We say like that person was a part of our history, no matter what the faults of that character was, being the slavery, the way that person technically was a traitor. They betrayed the English Empire because they would not allow him to grow in the army. His goal was to be a career army person, a career military person, and they thought he was an idiot. And they were like, no. So he was like, well, then I'm going to join this new group of people and I'm going to fight with them. And he became a general. And it's a sense of like, we have to become the change we want to see. If we believe that we should be a one person, it's our job to say, well, you know what? I'm no longer going to identify you as your stereotypes, or you're a black person and I'm a white person. Because even in certain cultures, like for example, when I was dating that woman that was from Africa, one of the big things that I noticed, especially the conversations that family would have, is the racism within their culture, which was the light-skinned people got treated different than the dark-skinned people. And they're all literally the same people. And, if you just take that mentality for that culture, it's the same thing that happens with our cultures all over the place. So, going back to the topic at hand, I think we had a lot of good points to be made. Obviously, this is a subject that can't be cured within 40 minutes, 50 minutes. It's definitely, but it's good that we're talking about it. It's good that maybe people will disagree with us. It's good that people might agree with us. It's good that people might start thinking about it in a different way. That's the purpose of the show, is to ultimately encourage conversation and not attack the conversation. So with that said, I want to give a big, huge thank you to everyone that was a part of today's Let Me Be Round with you. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent guest. I'm glad I was able to get you all together for a third episode. I know it's difficult in the time of COVID. We're actually in the same room. We just have cameras on, and we're 12 feet away from each other.
And different
And
backgrounds.
well, that was in your writers. You were like, could we have sets built for us? Kenny just said, could I have like a fun room background? I just want to be able to.
That wasn't even the most ridiculous thing we requested.
Green screens up in here.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you to everyone watching this episode of Let Me Be Round with You. And of course, if you want to interact, speak to, or simply just see what they're doing, all the information to contact Victoria McGinnis, Paula Plaga, Natalie Seagriff, and of course, the infamous Kenny Murdoch. Please check the description below. And you obviously can find out more information on our show, future episodes, and additional seasons below in the descriptions. Thank you so much.